All right, welcome everyone. I'm Che at the BVRC. I'm the program manager here. I work most closely with teachers and organizers to help them map and execute their retreats. And today I'm doing a bit of Q&A with Christiana, who will be hosting, along with Greg and Jennifer, a retreat on deep belonging. And so we're just going to do a little bit of Q&A just around the retreat, some other things that Christiana may be willing to share around just her journey and her movements through the Dharma and what inspires her to continue to move with and through the Dharma. All right, Christiana, you ready?
I am, and thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for your yes. So my first question is, what sort of inspires you to teach on the topic for this retreat for deep belonging?
Yeah, that really came out of my own just experience that practicing is really important. Practicing meditation and mindfulness is really important. And that when we do that together, like the sense of belonging or deep belonging just often just grows exponentially. So even when we're in silence and we're not talking to each other, it's really amazing like how close we can feel to people that we have never spoken a word with.
It is. I do remember having that experience in the times that I've sat also too. And I enjoy the quiet community in that
Yes.
way.
Yeah, it's very special. We're not used to that, right? So that we, yeah, hold space for ourselves and also for the bigger community and how powerful that is. And like in our times where like really people often feel lonely or people feel disconnected or there's just like this pain of disruption that's happening right now. And so I feel it's just a really beautiful opportunity to just come and fill your cup. Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, that feels like a really good intention.
Mm.
And who is there anyone that you would say that you had in mind in terms of who the retreat's for?
I mean, the retreat is, I mean, really for anybody who just feels called by what we want to offer. And also, like, so I'll be teaching with Greg Serpa, who is a clinical psychologist, and with Jennifer Cho, who is a licensed clinical social worker, and they both work at the VA. So, and I'm a consultant for the VA, and we have been like teaching a year-long mindfulness facilitator training there on a national level for some years now. And so it kind of also really feels like this confluence of Western psychology with the Buddhist teachings, which feels really meaningful. And so I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist, but they both are. And so and I've taught with Greg retreats together in the past, and it's a very nice confluence of these two streams as we're deepening our practice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sounds like a very harmonious balance, getting into the mind from different angles.
Exactly, exactly. And through like I mean, against like the backdrop of silence and being still and the traditional Buddhist teachings, but then also, and especially for people who also facilitate mindfulness or mindfulness groups, I think it can be very helpful to also see how we're doing that. So it's not either or, but it really is something that we do together and weave together. Yeah. Mm.
Absolutely. Amen. Okay, let's see. What or who inspired you to teach the Dharma?
Um, I think to quite some extent, Trudy Goodman.
Mhm.
So when I moved to Los Angeles, like almost 21 years ago, I had already been practicing for like over a decade, but I was working as a physician, so I was not interested to teaching the Dharma. So when I came here and I met Trudy, pretty much like 2 weeks after we moved here, yeah, it was just we really connected. And then I first just helped out with just like schlepping cushions and driving stuff to locations and then cooking for retreat. So basically like right what we do when like hands are needed. And then at some point I remember she saying to me, you know, and I thought it's like cute that she said that, you know, like what you're doing is like it's like you're driving a Mercedes to the mailbox. And and yeah, of course, Mercedes is a German car, and I'm from Germany, right? So I thought that was so cute that she used that. But she basically said, like, you should be teaching.
Mm,
I mean,
mhm,
it's wonderful, right? That you basically drive the Mercedes to the mailbox, but like the Mercedes is actually made to do something else. And I thought, like, oh, okay. So she kind of ushered me into teaching,
mhm,
which is, I really appreciated that because I was not looking for that.
mhm,
And then, of course, learning from her and then coming back to like really the confluence of like Buddhism and Western psychology because she was a therapist for so many years. So her teaching, and then, of course, also Jack's teaching, they're also bringing these two streams together. And that made always so much sense to me, especially because I have this medical background. So it's like, oh yeah, like we know how the body works, how the mind works, how the psyche works. And the Buddha knew that too.
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Mm.
Do you feel like the transition from being immersed in medicine and the body was easy to transition into a more Dharma-based focus and offer?
No. It was a hard journey too. I mean, somebody just actually asked me a couple of days ago, it's like, do you still miss medicine? And I thought and felt into this thought like, it's getting less. So after actually not practicing active, like proper medicine for so many years, it took a really long time for me to feel like, yeah, that longing of this just particular way to be with people was diminishing. Where I find it really helpful is really like the just the ease around the body
Mhm,
and the vocabulary that I have around the body. Yeah, so that the whole like the first foundation of mindfulness, mindfulness of the body,
mhm,
that always made so much sense to me.
yeah,
Right. And so now that we're like seeing through research also that how important that is to be able to feel the body in a safe way. Yeah. So not being hyper focused on when it hurts or when we're super anxious, right? So we don't want to feel that and then we're just forgetting about the body, or it's like so we're so blocked off from our emotions and how we feel. So it feels like we're very out of balance. And so I think the teachings, Buddhist teachings are just fabulous tools to re-inhabit the body, to re-embody ourselves, to be embodied, and to do that in a safe way so that it actually eventually feels like I'm at home in this
which is a big, big shift for many people.
for many people. Oh yeah. Yeah.
There's
And
so
then
much. Oh, go ahead.
go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say there's so much around the external, how
Yes.
the external holds you, how the external affects you,
Oh
what
my
is
God.
from the outside. So to
Yes.
completely change that perspective is
Yes.
everything.
Yeah. It is, and it's, I think it's so important for us as teachers to hold the trust that it's possible.
Mm,
Yeah. And so many, and again, like we're in a, like live in a society that values the mind so much over the body. And then, so the conditioning we've gotten through that, and then we happen to live in a female body, right? So the conditioning around that, right?
yeah.
And all the other conditionings of just the messages that we have gotten around our bodies on
Mm,
an individual level and on a collective level, it's just, there's so much undoing necessary and so much healing necessary. And these practices, they can provide that. They can
absolutely.
provide that. Yeah.
Yeah, very much so.
Mm.
Oh, thank you for that. Here's the next question. How would you describe your teaching style?
Well, just like I'm doing it right now. So I teach with my hands and I teach with my face. And humor is super important for me. So that we're not taking ourselves too seriously. I think that's really important. And I think I mean, what I'm noticing as I'm practicing more and more, and I just get into deeper layers of my own conditioning and of my own historical trauma and transgenerational trauma, like it feels at least that way that my compassion is growing
Mm,
and my just like I am often so humbled by what I discover, right? Even after all these years of practicing, it's just like, oh, it's still here, still shows up. And to see that often, not always, of course, but it often makes my heart really tender. Goes like, oh yeah, that's happening for other people too. So I think I can sit with people who are in pain.
mm.
To boil it down, I think, right? And I mean, as you know, I'm working a lot with people with chronic pain and chronic illness, but it also is like it's also, of course, emotional pain that we're often carrying. Yeah. And again, like we need to do that together.
I think that is for you to highlight that is really interesting to me in terms of you coming from a background, that's dealing with a lot of pain in the body. And so still being able to have the spaciousness from that experience for you and bring that into, yourself as a teacher of the Dharma. It's a big one. Obviously, in my mind, a bit more nuanced because, getting into the internal and that sort of pain and the emotional pain, there's a little bit more peeling back of the layers and digging in
Mm,
to get to the core of things in some ways. So, yeah.
yeah. Mhm.
All right, let's see. What are you focusing on in terms of your spiritual growth right now?
Um, I think what I'm exploring and have been exploring for a number of years is really um, what is the universal body of the teachings, and then what is the individual body of the teaching that shows up in this body, and in
Mm,
particular for me, this female body at this stage of life.
okay.
And that is like, so, right? So the Theravada tradition, insight meditation tradition is very patriarchal.
Mm,
And
oh,
it is to, or at least the way it appears, it is in many ways, and again, a lot of ways that where it actually makes sense of how it came to this, it is very anti-family, anti-sensual, and anti-female experience.
mm, mhm.
That's my personal
Yeah.
interpretation or perception.
Mm,
And so I'm trying to find myself with my practice of just this on this path of just like seeing, so what actually is female. And I know people say like, well, on the ultimate level there is no female, I mean there's no gender, and I get that, but that's not where I live. I
okay.
just happen to live in this body.
Mm,
And so where, again, like just like we do when we focus so much on the mind, so if we have teachings that historically focus so much on the male experience, so what's missing? What's not there? Yeah. And again, for me, just with my personal background as a German, as a feminist, as somebody who comes from a female lineage of having to prove that you're as valuable as the men,
okay.
right? So, which brings a lot of like fight and hardness into my system. I noticed that.
Mm,
And so to reclaim the other side, right? So like if the teachings are complete, so they're not either or,
right.
and to see where do they get out of balance, or what is my perception where they get out of balance. That
Okay.
was a lot of words to explain, but as you can see, it's a very alive process that I'm in with that.
But it's a really big one. And I understand that from a personal standpoint, for me on the balance side of it, but then also understanding the amount of power that comes in, whether that be, the female body and female spiritual energy, and how the two, the masculine and the feminine, are both necessary, are both embodied by everyone,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
how it can look different in
Yes.
everyone. So I do very tangibly understand this wholeness that you're talking about, constantly sort of negotiating and exploring and
Yes.
being clear about the balance being present, in the teaching and for yourself and your own embodiment.
Mhm. Mhm.
Well,
Mhm.
that's a really big one. That's
Mhm.
not something you often, I don't, well, at least in my experience, I haven't really gotten to hear many teachers speak about, but I know there's many things I think that have been sewn into place, in different, especially in the West, that can be unpacked in that way. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um, and what about what are you leaning into for bliss and joy these days?
Um, Nature, a lot really nature. And I mean, you know that, but I'm a long distance runner,
Yes, yeah.
and I run in the mountains, and I'm a trail runner. And I'm already so psyched about being up in Big Bear again because the Big Bear trails are just fantastic.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I knew you did the long distance because I think one of the last times you were here, you had just finished or you were in the process of preparing for a long race, for a
Yeah.
marathon, I think. But I didn't realize you also did the trail running
Yeah,
too.
no, it's like that's mainly what I do. Is like I kind of grew out of road races.
Okay.
And yeah, just a connection of just like having a moving, sweating body in nature. That's like a bliss state for me right there. So that's one thing that's out of the many that is really important to me.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's so much space here up the mountain to be immersed in nature. So, yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
and that's all, but also nature actually. So nature, not only while I move through it, but um, so I've started to move also more towards teaching retreats in nature. So where we actually practice outside.
Okay.
And because nature is such an amazing teacher.
It is. It is.
Yeah, so the teachings are right there. Yeah,
Mhm.
so I don't like we sit outside and I actually don't need to teach about like impermanence or
Ooh,
about the elements or about right rising, passing away. I mean, all these things and they're right there.
mm,
It's not personal and discomfort happens. Discomfort is not personal, all these things. So just being still in nature is also really beautiful. And
yeah.
that is something I just want to share that also like maybe that might be of interest for people who are listening. So I've started, I was nudged by one of my mentors to, when the weather allows it, and then of course we can discuss what that means for every person, but when the weather allows it, is I meditate outside.
Mhm.
So we have a small yard. So I have a spot, it's called a sit spot.
Mm,
And that's where I do a lot of my daily meditations, just
okay.
being outside. And it's so different from meditating inside.
Yes.
I mean, it's obvious when you start thinking about it, but until you really sit outside every day and meditate and like be exposed like to the sun and the wind and the temperature and all the outside sounds, it
Mhm.
really makes a difference. Like in just this idea of just like, oh, I'm part of that bigger thing.
Mm.
I'm not this disconnected thing that just happens inside like climate acclimated room. Yeah. So it's really nice. Yeah.
You find that the stillness outside really leaves an impression on you because even if there's sirens or something else comes into the space, I find that still being outside, hearing the trees, hearing the
Yeah.
birds, hearing the
Yeah.
wind is still very calming for me.
I mean, I'm sure if I would sit like in the middle of a busy traffic, I mean, I think you see people like meditating in the middle of like New York traffic. It's just like,
It
that's like advanced practice, right? But I have a
is.
backyard, and you're a Big Bear Retreat Center, and will it be a Big Bear Retreat Center? So that is definitely like helps with
Absolutely.
feeling part of nature and something bigger.
Christiana, thank you so much for making the space and time to come sit with me and answer these questions and give folks who are interested in the retreat, exploring BBRC, the opportunity to get to see you, hear from you, and hear some other insightful questions in terms of retreat, in terms of Dharma and your own practices. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.